Hey everybody, in this video we're going to go through CSS Basics. So we're in our CSS file and you have these different selectors and we're doing basic things like changing backgrounds, text alignment, width, margins, font style, as well as font weight. So here we have our A tag, and if we hover over our A tag we will change colors. We'll also go through the basics of CSS Grids, which allows us to organize and format our website in an aesthetically pleasing way. So looking at our website, it doesn't look like too much, but we have organized it and colored it in a way that looks a lot better than what it did before. And we have our hovering over buttons. You can click on one of these links and it can go to different web pages, as well as formatting this grid so that you have a navigation bar that you can look at. Okay, this is just the beginning. We're going to keep going through this, but here's a good way to learn a lot of great CSS basics. Okay, first we're going to create a quick HTML document that we can use. So I'm going to save my file as, and I'm going to create a folder for this. So in a CSS folder, I have already some practice ones there, but I'm going to create a new folder for CSS practice, and that is going to be the folder that I'm going to use. And in there I'm going to create my CSS practice.html, and quickly we're going to create an HTML document. Okay, so doc type HTML tag. We'll create a header and we will create a title. Now the header, more than anything, the head is just signifying where the start is, the head and the body. Okay, so this is not the body, so CSS practice can be our title. Then we can go ahead and go into creating a body. And we can start off by just creating a simple H1. And so as we go through this, I'm going to show you guys, this is my practice CSS web page. Okay, and so right away we're going to get into our CSS. So if I create a new file, and first I save this with Control S, and I save my file as, make sure I'm still in the CSS practice folder, same place we have it for this. And the default name for many CSS pages or files is style.css, so that's what we're going to name it down here. So I'm going to save it as style.css, and right away we can type out, and you can see since we have the syntax as the CSS syntax, body will show up red. If I typed body in here, as you guys know, it would be black, and starting off it does not start off as red. You can quickly create, the first thing we're going to do is create the background color, and we can name it, we can say that it is red. If you save that, so we go to our CSS practice folder and we click on our CSS practice.html, we should see this web page, and as you can see, nothing has happened to the background. That is because we have not linked our CSS. That is one of the most important things that you can do. And so in order to link, you want this to happen right away, right as the page loads. So we'll put it in our header, and we are going to link a style sheet, and you need to put this in quotes. And we want to also have an href attribute that will equal the file name, so style.css. So we save that. Now we go back to our CSS practice, and the background shows up as red. Okay. Another thing we can do is we don't have to have it be body. It could be H1. It could be any tag that we put in here that shows up. It will show up when we refresh, so the background of this entire line, H1 line, is red now. Okay. Another way we can do some CSS, if we're doing something really short and quick, is we can just do style and put style right here. And then if I put in body, you see it shows up red once again. And I said background color is blue. You will see the change of a blue background with red on the H1. So it does communicate with both the style.css file and the style in here. Now you'll quickly understand that if you did all of your styling inside of your HTML document, first of all, you'd only be able to create this one time, as opposed to style.css. You could change up your styling, you could save it. It's easier to see where your styling happens. Whereas if you did it all in your style tag, that would cause some issues. So we are going to stick with just doing it in our style.css. Another thing you can do is change your font color. So if you want your font color to be blue, you could refresh the background. If you save your HTML, your background will not be blue anymore. It'll be white, and your text will be blue. But it is important to understand that web pages need to be legible and very easy to read. So you don't want to overcomplicate it with too much stuff and make the coloring hard to see. Similar to a presentation, a web page is based off of what it looks like a lot. And so what I've done in Canvas, and many text editors will have this, is you can have certain user preferences and you can go through and do different things. One of the things that I've done, you can change the font size if you want people to see it a little, or want yourself to be able to read it a little easier. But there are some things down here, like use worker is control space, which will give you the autocomplete, different options that you can choose from, the different attributes you can add, the different tags you can add in your HTML. The autocomplete live is something I've changed from false to true. This makes it so that when I add in something like color, it starts showing you the different options that you have, and you can see just with COL the many different options that you have on how you can change things. Okay, so now I'm going to create a paragraph as well in our body. And so I'm going to create a p tag, and I can say this is my paragraph, and I can add a lot of tags. Say this is a new line, and then I'm actually going to create a line break. Not the best way to do it. It's a lot better to do this actually with CSS, but we don't know how to do that quite yet. So I'm going to do a few line breaks to start off. And show you guys how this works. You want to make sure your code lines up enough that it's easy enough to read. You don't want yourself or anyone else to have problems reading it, so that's good enough for what we're trying to do. And so you see that these all get put on new lines except the very first one, because there's not, even with all these spaces, it doesn't do anything for it. But doing a BR tag will give it a new line, and so now you can see that these are all in a new line. We can also go in to the p tag, and we could give this a different background color, we could give it a different font color, but for now we're just going to create the font. Okay, so you can choose a font family is what we're going to do next, and we can do control space, and that can give us our different options here. You guys can choose whatever you want. And then you can also see what else we can do with font. So font display, font size. So let's do font size, and we'll do, let's do 20 pixels. You can do pixel based. You can do EM is, you can look that up, but that's a certain size numeric unit of measure that you can choose from, but we're going to do pixels. That'll just give you guys a pixel size. Font weight is also another one we can do, which will say how thick we want it. If we want it bold, it'll pop up the bold property values right there. And so let's see what all we've done to our CSS here. Okay, so you see the font's changed, it's bold, it's a little bit bigger as well. Okay, so another common thing to do within your CSS is create a navigation bar. And so in order to do that, you will create an unordered list. And so you can do UL, and we can do a list item, and we have a link to it. Say href equals home.html, and then close that A tag and have the button, the text that will be on there for home. And then you can copy this and paste, and home, about, news, and we can do a contact page, and then we can do about, news, and contact. Okay, now if we just take a look at this, you'll see that you have 4 bullets, home, about, news, contact. That should take you to a page, but it is not found because we don't have those in there. So now that we have this, what we can do is we can go in and we could say that we want our unordered list. We want to have some specifications to it. Let's remove the bullets. Let's remove the outline. There's a certain margin that comes with every thing that is on there that doesn't allow for. So as you can see, there's a little bit of space between the "this is my practice CSS web page" and where the red stops. Okay, that is your padding. And then you can see that there's a little bit of space between here and the home page. That would be your margin outside of that. So we want to get rid of the space that pushes it up to the left. So we want to get it as close to the edges as we can, and not have any space or padding, any margins or padding. So first, let's get rid of those bullets. So list style, and we can have a style type, and we're going to have none, so it has no extra styling to it. And so if we save that and we refresh, that gets rid of the bullets. Okay, then we can do margin 0, give it no margin, no padding. And then save that, see what that does for us. See how that pushes it up to the left. That makes it so that there's no extra padding to it. There's also an option to have a width or a size to all of our things. And so one of them could be, a width. You can always go a percentage. So if I did width 100%, this really wouldn't change anything, except that it would actually stretch across the whole place, and you can't actually see that. And since we don't have any of our lists wide enough, it really doesn't matter at this time, but it's good to know. And then let's go ahead and give this a background color. With the colors, you don't necessarily have to have a specific color in mind. You can go and get HTML colors by having an RGB value of, you could put in the different red, green, blue colors. So this will be more green and blue than it is red. So you see it's a darker green or darker blue color. Okay, if I increase this red to 100, and this is out of 256 is the largest. So it's much more of a purple color because there's more red involved in it. So you can see how that works. So we can go into each individual list item and also specify that we want to talk about their links, their A tags. So not only are we going into the list, but we're going into the specific A tag. This allows it so that if you click on the link, the whole thing will be considered a link. And so I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you do a display as a block, and you say the color as an RGB value of 000, and you save it, you can see that the text the colored text has turned to black. So if we want to get rid of the underline, we can do text decoration, and we could say none. That will not add any extra text decoration to our link. Okay, and so if we take a look, it got removed. Let's change the font size to something quite a bit bigger. So let's make it 30 pixels. So it's nice and big, so you can see that these now, not only if I highlight over this part will it show up as a link, but if I highlight down here, and that is because of the display block. And actually, if you change these to 255, since 0 is included on there, it goes up to 255, not 256. You refresh that, these become white. There's also a great site, HTML color codes, where you can go on and you can pick your exact color and it'll give you the RGB value. It'll also give you something called a hexadecimal value, which is right here. And if you just add a hashtag or a number symbol right there and add this code, that also works for color. So let's go ahead and prove that. Paste and save. I go back into here. You can see that these change colors. Okay, but I'm gonna go back to white. Okay, another cool thing you can do is you can do specifically to the A tag, you can do something, you know, in addition to that. There's something called a hover. And so when you actually hover over it, it will change what the link looks like. So you can change the background color to black, and you can change the color of the font to blue, and do all sorts of crazy stuff. Now, this might not look the most professional as you go through there, but now you can see that you can go to each one of these. Okay, and then just a little extra here, going back to home.html, about.html. If you create files, let's go ahead and do it. So let's create a we save file as, and we save it as home.html in the same folder as our CSS practice.html and style.css. We can just do real quick doc type HTML. Don't forget the exclamation point. HTML header title, and you can say this is our home page. Okay, now it would make sense that the home page would actually take us back to the CSS practice.html, but that's okay, it doesn't really work for our purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and create a body and an H1 that says home page. Okay, and then if I save that and I open back up and refresh and I click on our home page, it will take me to the home page. Okay, I can also go in and I could say href to this same exact page, which would bring us back to reloading our home page. You can see it keeps reloading for me. Okay, but I'll change that back to home. Okay, save that. Another good formatting tip is just a text align. If you want to center your home page, I've saved it. This is my practice web page. So you can also change your width so it doesn't stretch across the whole screen, and so you can have your width be a percentage. That's what I usually recommend, and about 70% is not too bad. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. When we do that, that will shrink it so it doesn't across the whole screen. We can go 60%. Then you can also have your margins, and you could set all of your margins to auto. And what that will do is that will automatically even out your left side and your right side. It will also snug up so that there's no margin between your home page and your header. And so that might be something you want to do. Maybe you want to add in a margin bottom of 10 pixels. And then you see that there's a little bit of space right there. There's a variety of other things that you can do. You can change the height, and you can change the height by pixel size. The fact that it's scrolling down makes it a little bit more difficult to make this a percent. But if we do a percent, let's say we did 10%, let's see what that will do for us. Okay, so it doesn't really do anything for us. So you need to use pixel size for the height, because as you scroll down your page, you don't know the actual height. What is 10% of a web page? That depends on the monitor, depends on a lot of things. So the good thing about doing a percent as opposed to a actual width pixel size is that as you shrink the page, you can see that it shrinks with it. If let's say I did a pixel size of 600 pixels, and I checked how that would work here, no matter the size, it would not shrink based off the size. It would just stay the same size. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I think starting with percents whenever you can, I think looks a little bit better, but you can do either one. Another way you can change height, which would give it some centering, is doing some padding. And so if we do some padding of, let's say, 20 pixels on each side, it would allow us to have it centered and have 20 pixels below and above it, and on the left and on the right. And you can change your width accordingly and try to make it as good of looking of a title page as you can. You might want to change your font style and take a look at other web pages so you get what looks best for you. It's also usually a good idea to use neutral colors, especially starting out. I like my grays and my blues. That usually makes it so you can make a little bit cleaner looking website as opposed to making a bunch of different colors. But this is being our practice, and this just kind of being a CSS cheat sheet. This should just help you out just knowing this stuff. Okay, another thing that is really important in CSS is understanding different selectors. So we've already been doing a lot on selectors. So before we talk about selectors, okay, now that we have our padding, there's a little bit of a warning that comes up, and it says using a width with padding can sometimes make elements larger than you expect. So just so you know, it's adding 20 pixels. So if I change this to 0, save, and you look specifically at the width shrunk down a little bit. That's because it adds the 20 pixels on top of the 50%. So just be aware of that. And then let's go ahead and talk about selectors. So selectors, we've already had some selectors. That's what each one of these red marks are called a selector. And we have an A tag that's a selector within another selector. So inside of our list, inside of the A tag specifically, we don't have any decorations, font size, yada yada yada. We also have a hover attribute that is connected with our A tag. So when we hover over specifically the A tag, we will change the background to black and the text to blue. So there's other things that you need to know how to specify a little bit. That helps things become a little bit more organized. Okay, so below our paragraph, I'm going to talk about the divs. So a div is a division element, and so sometimes I'll call them divisors. So within a div, you can organize your placement of your HTML a little bit better. So if I had a div, and you can create an attribute that is a class that will be able to be reused. So a grid, it's called a grid container. And within this grid container, we are going to make just a numbered grid, just a really simple grid. So div class equals, it's going to be a grid item. And then it's going to be 1. And then we're going to make 9 grid items. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then we save that. Then we can go into our CSS styling, and we need to declare a dot grid container. So that dot signifies that it is of the class type of grid container. So our grid container will display not a block but a grid, and this grid will allow us to have a kind of like a table available to us. Okay, so we can give this grid a total width. And let's give it 600 pixels. And then we can do a grid template columns. So we need to introduce the number of columns that we want. So we can do 20 pixels, 20 pixels, and 20 pixels. And it'll automatically create 3 columns of 20 pixels. So you see that these are in a much more of a grid format. We could also change this and do auto, and auto. And they would spread out over the 600 pixels that it expected it to be. Okay, but if I wanted it to be 200 pixels, it would get is spread out to 200 pixels as well. Okay, another thing we can do is we can do dot grid item. And so that's the whole grid item class. Background, color, light blue. So we can do shorthand of outline. Outline, you can just put outline, and then you could say the number of pixels, let's say 3 pixels on the outline, and we'll have it be solid and be black. And then we'll save that, and we should see the colors show up and the boxes around each colors, so we get a little bit better look at our grid. This actually works out really well if we wanted to stretch home, about, news, and contact across the entire page. We could give it a class equals grid item. To each one of these. And then we could give it a class equals grid container. And then now you see it's only 3 across, so it's going down to the next level. So this is where some things can conflict. And so if I created a 4th auto, it would change both of ours. The width is already set at 200 pixels. If we made it 500 pixels, or a percentage, you could see how these could change. Problem is, it's also changing these. So there's a couple things that you could do. You could change the name and call it grid container 1, and then we could copy and paste it and make a grid container 2, and maybe the grid container 2 only has 3 of these. Or there's another selector option that you can do as well. So I'm going to undo what I've done here, all the way back to the outline. Okay, save that. You can also give it an ID, and this would be our ID of menu. And so if we refresh this, this still has the blue outline because they're still grid items, which we will change here in a moment. But we don't have to necessarily. So you see how these line back up, they don't have the 3 across because it's not a grid. So first I'm going to see, so now you can see how you could reuse grid item if you wanted them to be the same for everything. Blue with a black outline if you wanted to keep reusing that. If you would just have to use grid item as the class name. Another selector option is to get the ID is with a hashtag menu. Then we can use similar code, display grid, width, and template, but my grid could be 90%, so most all of the screen, and auto, 4 autos. And then now you can see my home page, about, news, and contact go across the screen. We could also text align center, allowing them to be in the middle. And you could also create a margin auto, so it would automatically margin each side. And now you can kind of see how we can start organizing this page more and more. I could also have my paragraph, although it would obviously more than likely be a longer paragraph. I could also margin specifically the left side and say I want it 100 pixels over from the left, and then you can see it being pushed over. So the rest, I'm just going to add a body selector that has a background color, and we can do a blue. And you can see how we can start forming and developing our page. Now there's 2 things I really wanted to go over, and that is specifying what they call the CSS Box Model, where you have a margin, so that's the very outside between your content and the edge of the screen or the next line. Then you have your border, which will be kind of your outline or the very edge of your content, of your color and what it looks like, so the border. So let's look back at our web page. Okay, here is the margin between the top and the bottom, that 10 pixels that I actually created, I physically created. Okay, we also centered it using the margin auto, the width. So here we have our width 50%, our margin is auto, our margin bottom is 10 pixels, and then we did an extra layer of padding, which is 20 pixels. So let's take a look at that. So as it says right here, the border would be the very edge here, just on the inside, just inside of the margin. Okay, so here's the border, and then the padding is the extra gap in between the content. The padding is the extra gap between the content and the border. Okay. So just be aware of that as you're creating and designing and moving and shifting things around. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the CSS Grid layout module. There's a whole extra lesson that I'm going to be going over on how to set up a full grid, because sometimes you want your first row to extend all the way across for your header, and then you might want to have a menu that starts just below the header and stretches down the page, as well as have your main content, and maybe you want to have an add off to the right, maybe you want to have some more content or a footer at the bottom of your page. So going through grids is kind of a tedious process, and you need to make sure that we spend more time on it, which I'm going to go over. And so that is it for this web page. I hope you guys were able to learn a lot about formatting and understanding border, padding, margin, as well as the content, hover button, changing color backgrounds, changing font colors, looking over attributes. We talked about selectors within other selectors, also having attributes to our selectors, talking about classes where we can have multiple things used in there, where we have all of our grid containers and we have all these grid items that have a light blue background and a solid black text. So that's what all of these look like, have a light blue background with a solid black text with a solid black outline, excuse me. And then the last thing we talked about was IDs and how to select a specific ID. So here in our HTML, we have all of these class elements that are grid items, and then we also have this one menu ID that has different rules. So instead of having 3 columns, we have 4 up here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and you stick around and watch the next one, which will be going over a little bit more detail about CSS Grids. And this is just the beginning. CSS takes a while. It's more of a work of art. These are just a few tips and tools to get you guys started, so I hope you guys enjoyed.